the first thing I want to ask people to do is if they could go to the chat module. I've just got a I thought I'd start with a question to kind of root ourselves on this journey as we look through infographics and microlearning. And I'd just like you just to take a moment to think, and then when you have an answer or some thoughts, if you could add them to the chat, that'd be great, just to kind of, if you like, put a pin in the map of where we're all coming from. And I'd like you to think about this. What images and graphical information or charts do you use in your work, presentations, teaching, microlearning? What kind of images and graphs and infographics do you use, and why do you use them? So there's two questions there. Is what kind of graphical input do you put into your microlearning, and why do you use those certain types of graphics and charts? If you could put them in the chat, that'd be great, and I'll pull some out. Michelle uses none. Hey, cool, Michelle, well done. It's sometimes quite hard to know what to do, but okay, great. That's a really honest answer. Appreciate that. I can see Andy's typing because it says several users are typing. It says at the bottom. I like that about this feature. I try to use them to help people see things. Genuinely, that's all. So I often use things like pie charts and bar charts to help people see distributions of information and percentages. It's useful. Suddenly waiting for all these things. So several users are typing, so I'm suddenly waiting for them all to come at once. Guy, do you ever use any graphics and stuff? I know we have a children's learning app. We use Lottie to teach various subjects. Okay. Is Lottie the app? Yeah, I think it is, Adam, isn't it? Great. Okay. DopaLearn is the app. Okay. Great. Thank you. I'll just wait for a couple more. Nano Learning. Cool. Andy uses a circular calendar so they can see the seasons of the month. That's on a menstrual. I'm going to say this wrong, isn't it? Some kind of. I can't read those words because I don't want to say them wrong, but it sounds like it's something to do with the menstrual cycle, which is good to use a circular calendar. That's visual and clear. Great. And it's quite cool. It's circular because it's the calendar month is kind of related to the moon, goes around in circles. I like that. That's cool. Well, what I'll do is, if any others are pushing in, that's great. I'll crack on. But I just kind of wanted to kind of root things into the kind of into your world, get you thinking about why you might be using visuals or graphics in what you're doing. And for the last couple of months, I've been trying to develop my skills as a visual storyteller through the use of infographics. And as well as kind of hitting the internet and Googling and reading as much as I could find about the topic, I suddenly got to the point where I felt that I should top up on some knowledge about A, how to make really great, compelling infographics, but B, the science and the thought that goes behind them. So I signed up for an online course with Central St Martin's College in London, which is part of University of the Arts in London, and I did an infographic course. And within my work that I do, I am often using story and narrative as a driver. So I felt like I had some insight into infographics because it's often about stories. But what I want to share at this point is that I'm not an expert on infographics. So I'm not an expert graphic designer. I'm a bit of a hack. I like having a go at that kind of stuff. But I am a learner. And for the next few moments that we've got together, what I want to do is I want to delve into the power of infographics with a view, and I kind of want to come alongside you and share a view with you that might contribute to a purposeful level of engagement for you with students in microlearning. So anybody who you've got using your microlearning apps or your courses, is just to kind of come alongside you and say, hey, infographics might be useful. It's not the answer for everything, but it might be useful for you. And I want to do that from a kind of perspective of knowledge sharing. I'm no expert. However, I'm beginning to be a connoisseur of infographics, and I know what I like. And hopefully, as I open up some of the kind of principles and practices, you'll get that. So what I'm aiming to provide you in these next few moments is a helpful snapshot that might encourage you to go further into the subject yourself and see how they could be used with your instruction and your learning materials. So I'm going to cover, I'm going to kind of try and make the case for infographics. I'm going to go into a little bit about a definition of what an infographic is, and a little bit of history. I always like a bit of history. Also think about what makes a good infographic, and then from that is drawing out the principles of actually some sound principles of how you communicate with data. And then I'm going to think about some storytelling methods that we can use in infographics. And then I'm going to point you to some useful resources. So I hope that's the journey you're on. And where possible, I have put references on my slides. And I think Guy will send you a copy of the PDF. And then you can pursue these things at your own leisure. So the first thing I want to think is when it comes to why do we use infographics? Well, the first thing is that 60%, 65, when a relevant image is used and it's paired with text information, people can recall 65% of the information 3 days later. Now, I know within microlearning, what we're trying to do is shorten how people, the forgetting cycle, and we're trying to encourage people to remember. So to lean into that, when you realize that 65% of information can be recalled 3 days later when it's paired with a graphic, this is something that is really important. It's a very powerful thing. Also, according to the kind of learning style gurus out there, 65% of the population are visual learners. They need images to stimulate them. So we're going to lean into that too. And also, kind of moving into the kind of neuroscience part of it is that our brains can read pictures faster than text. We can recognize images faster than text. So for me, if we're looking to help our learners, giving them good visuals will help them do that. Also, I was quite surprised by this. Is that we tend to fixate on numerals because numbers represent facts. And it's a really interesting thing that actually when we put something up and we've got a picture with numbers next to it, we can make sense of it. So we live in a very visual world. And if we are trying to help our learners or our students or our clients learn and gain things, why would we not lean into that culture to actually help them remember things? Now, it may well be that you might not necessarily be particularly a visual learner or a visual thinker, or you might not think about that, but actually when you're presenting information, could you present it in a graphical way that would help over 65% of learners in the world remember it? And that for me is one of the compelling facts around why I think we should use infographics. But there's something really important is there's a balance to be kind of achieved, and this is there's a difference between data and information. So data, I would define as facts and statistics that are collected together for reference or analysis. Okay, so that can be from everything from kind of, even your phones will collect data on you about your sleep or your usage. I have a really interesting app on my iPhone that tells me how much I use it. And I always have slight guilt when I realize I'm using the social media too much. But we can collect data that way. But the important thing is we also have to understand that data on its own is not compelling. What we need to do is we need to understand that there's a role for information, and that I would define as that which is conveyed or represented by a particular arrangement or sequence of things. So information, if you like, would use data to present something that is easy to understand or makes it understandable. And what I hope to data that is intentionally shaped into information can help both our teaching and learning. So it's not just plonking some, an Excel spreadsheet of statistics in front of someone. Our job is to actually be able to to intentionally shape in data into information that can help both teaching and learning. Are we okay with moving forward? Or any questions at that point? Someone is typing. Oh, we've got a thumbs up. I like that. Thanks, AM. Whoever AM is. That's Andy, isn't it? Thank you. Great. So I'll move on. Let me tell you about three aspects, three types of data design that you can come across. There are three. First of all, there is something called information design. Then we've got data visualization, and then we've got infographics. And if we can get our head around these three different types of data design, I think we can be in a position where we can know what we need to put into our learning environments for our learners. So let me take you into the world of information design. This is something that I find really interesting. So just on the slide, before I tell you what it is, just on the slide, I thought I'd show you that this was these were the road signs that were designed in 1964 for the British motorways. What had happened is the motorways started opening up in the 60s and 70s, and cars were driving faster, and they needed signs that could be easily recognized. So that's why they're on the slide. But information design is the practice of presenting information in a way that makes it most accessible and easily understood by users. Information design is targeted to specific audiences in specific situations to meet defined objectives. And I find the easiest way to talk about information design is actually, it's very pictorial. It's almost international. So even though some of you may have different road signs in the territories or places where you are, you could probably, if I took away the text from those things, you could probably understand what those signs meant a little bit. There might be some which is a little bit of a change, but most of those signs will speak for themselves. Another really good example of information design is the emoji. They are pretty much universal and international as to what they mean. So I picked out two. I picked out fish and cocktail as random ones. As you can see, there's no explanation of them. They're just information designed in something which can be easily understood. And to give you a little bit of history, Willem van Lancker, who's responsible for designing the original suite of emojis for Apple, originally did that, I think might have been about, I think it's 10, 15 years ago with Apple in Japan. Really interesting. But these are international things, and you'll know that you can send pictures to people and they can have meaning. So that's information design. So if you think about a really good example of information design would be the signs that they have on toilets to define gender. They're internationally speaking. Most of them go, if you go to an airport, wherever it is across the world, whether it's in Singapore or whether it's in Amsterdam or whether it's in New York, you know, there's an international picture for a toilet. They don't have male or female on it. They just have a symbol or a sign. That is what information design is. It's designed in such a way that actually it's easy to read and you know what it is. I guess if you're in a country that you're not comfortable with, there's always that little bit of intrepidation of when you test it out. However, most of the time it works. So that's information design. So it's very simple. It's often pictorial. I think icons and emojis are a really good example of contemporary information design. And if you're designing apps, you will have certain buttons which mean certain things, and you will often just have a picture. I have an app for my electric car, which for the charging thing has a little plug which has got a little electric symbol next to it. No writing. It just said, I just click it and it tells me how much power I've got in my car. So that's information design. The next thing we want to talk about is data visualization. Don't get sidetracked by the slide, but what I want to say about data visualization, and I'll explain what the slide is in a second. Data visualization is whereby you make trends in huge sets of data instantly visible. It makes what's most important stand out. So you can have spreadsheets and of information and data, and it's only when you produce it into a graph that you can start to see patterns and relationships. So let me explain what I've put in front of you. This is a data visualization that took place I think it was after a cholera outbreak in London in 1854. There were lots of people who were dying of cholera, and it was only when Jon Snow, not from Game of Thrones, but Jon Snow from the 1800s, it's only when he started to map the cholera outbreaks onto a map of, only when he started to plot the cholera outbreaks on a map of the area of London where the cholera was taking place, that they actually worked out where the weak water source was. And you'll see that's right in the center of the picture. There was the highest outbreak there, and it was knocking on. So what data visualization does is it takes the evidence, it takes the raw data and puts it into a visual format, which makes it plain to see. So for example, lots of businesses do this. If they want to see how they're performing, they will often put their statistics of whatever's of interest in, whether it's data of sales or whether it's profit or loss. And you will see on a graph what's happening, and you can find relationships. And that's data visualization. Another really good example that I came across is another old one. This is Florence Nightingale, who is famed in Great Britain for being the nurse who pioneered nursing, who pioneered kind of basically the making sure your hospitals are really clean. And what these graphs show, she had to make the case that basically during the Crimean War, more soldiers were dying month on month in hospital than were in the battlefield. And she created what these are called Rose diagrams. And she was able to prove to the people who were paying her that the reason the death was coming was from bad cleanliness and hygiene in the hospitals. So if you go online and look at this, you can analyze this data, and she's actually just visually represented the statistics. And you'll see I think the ones that are closer in the middle are the red and the black are the deaths through battlefield injuries, and the other ones, and the blue ones, are deaths in hospitals. And she was able to prove that where the deaths were occurring and why it was by infection. There you go. And so it's a really interesting. So even way back then, if we can start presenting our data in a way which tells us something, but it's also really interesting. We also work in a world where sometimes there are some people. Somebody's done a thumbs down or thumbs up. Sorry, okay. But we live in a world where if we don't present something, if someone can't see it, they won't know it. And data visualization, sometimes where you can see a relationship happening like that, can make a compelling case for those who might refute what you're saying. So that's data visualization. I kind of want to move on to the kind of the meat and veg of it, which is the infographic. Just to say that this is a infographic. It's just amazing by this. He calls himself a data journalist. Is a guy called Juan Falesco, and he founded this company back in 2002, where he is able to put together both data, infographics, and story to create these wonderful infographics. And if you like, I like to define these as their visual representation of facts. So in this picture, we've got facts, events, numbers that reflects patterns and aligns to a story. They are best for telling a premeditated story, and they offer subjectivity. And the role of an infographic is to guide the audience to conclusions and point out relationships. So with this picture of the ocean wanderers, you will notice that there's a globe on the left side of it. That shows there's some statistics and data about the migration patterns. But what they're trying to do is trying to fill it out with data to actually tell a story. My understanding of infographics is you start with the story in mind, and then you work backwards and you work out what data you need. I'll be walking through a little bit about those kind of things. So those are the three things. So it's really important to, when people talk about infographics, is understanding there are three things. One is there's information design, which is about clarity. Then there's data visualization, which is about discovery, and then there is infographics, which is about storytelling. That's where I'm up to so far, and I think that's as fine a definition as I can get. Sometimes data visualization and infographic can be kind of merged a little bit, but I think the difference between data visualization and infographics is that data visualization just presents the data and you see it, whereas infographic is driven by the narrative of what you want people to see. So you start with your story in mind. Let me just go through a few practical things that are really useful, that I found really useful. There's another infographic there. So you have to think about, on an infographic, what is it that you'd like to show? And just to say that this is a really awesome website. It's the Data datavizcatalog.com. If you want to go on there and look at all the different kind of graphs and kind of visual representations you can use, this is a really good place to start. But it's possible to present data in a number of ways. You've got graphs, you've got charts, and each of these can help the viewer see the data in a way that makes sense. So I often talk about there's kind of four main areas that I think about when it comes to presenting information. You can do something called a comparison. You can compare things over time or among items. You can look at relationships. You can have multiple variables to do that. You can look at distributions, and you can look at composition over time and change. So this is one site that's really good, and I've got another site here for you which is excellent, which is the Data Viz project, and this has got some fantastic visuals. And if you're looking for a way to communicate data to people and you think, how can I present it visually, these are a really good place to start. But one of the things I want to say is that infographics is not just about charts that reveal things to the viewer. It's about the narrative that is told with those charts, if you like, and the interpretation and the story you're telling. So this is what I think is probably the best slide I've got, and I didn't make it. So this comes from a wonderful man called David McCandless. If you want to look into the power of infographics, he's like the Jedi Supermaster. He's like the kind of Gandalf wise person in the world. And he has these kind of four main areas that he picks up on, says what makes a good visualization. And he says, first of all, you need some information. You need to be passing some information across. That's the kind of yellow overlay there on the left. He says you need to tell a story with your information, but that story in itself needs to achieve a goal. What's the purpose of telling the story? What are you doing? And then he says, actually, the layer that's really interesting is what visual form are you going to use to communicate that? And how does it make sense to people? It's almost like the goal is like, what's the intention? You know, what are you hoping that people will discover? So this slide is the take home. And I would recommend, there are a number of books that he's written. If you feel like you want to buy some books, David McCandless is a really good place to go for. So remember that he says that every infographic should contain information. It should have a story, if you like, the concept. It has a goal. What's the intention? What people are going to discover? And then how do you visualize that? So for you if you're in instructional design, what's the best visual form to deliver the goal that you want, with the story that you want, with the information that you want? Now, it might well be that the infographic is not quite what you want and you just need to do data visualization, but at least you've gone through that process. So what I thought I'd do is I'm going to show you some work that I did. So I attended this course in July and August, and it was at University of the Arts London, and I'm going to share one of the tasks that I had and just see what you think. So here we are. Here's the task that I got. So I was given this is a screenshot of the spreadsheet that I was given. I was given a data set of house tenure in the UK in 2017 by ethnic group, by ethnicity. And what my challenge was to choose the data that I wanted, decide on a story, and then choose an infographic appropriate for that story, and then deliver it in the style for a magazine, either Stylist magazine, which is predominantly read by young women in the UK between 15 and 13, or GQ magazine, which is read by men between the ages of 20 and 35. And this will be a main infographic for the article, so I had to produce an infographic. So when you look at this data, you're thinking, well, what does it show you? And I actually looked at it for a long while and tore my hair out a little bit. But I thought what I'd show you is the infographic that I was able to produce. Now, it's not a perfect infographic, but it starts to tell a story. So if you're ready, I'll show you. Here it is. This is the infographic that I designed. It's going to take a while to load because it's a big picture. There it is. So from the data from those spreadsheets, I was able to extrapolate this information and try and present a story. So if I tell you, the story that I was trying to tell was that of all the different ethnicities other than white British within the UK, the home tenure was actually your ethnic background does depend on what type of house you live in. So I tried to present it as a story which was, as you can see from the top, this was the question I want to ask: does ethnic background determine home tenure in the United Kingdom? And so I was able to take the statistics and present them in such a way. And what you'll notice is on the left, I produced a graph which showed total home tenure in the UK. And obviously the biggest one there is white British. But the interesting ones, the ones which were of interest to me, were the other ethnic groups. And then as you move across the page, what I've done is focused on those. So I was able to look at the percentage of home ownership or home rental within each of those groups. Now, I'm not big on rental and tenure statistics, but what I want to show is the process that I did. And you'll notice on each of the graphs, what I've tried to do is where I've tried to make the information kind of clear, I've used color, and where I don't think it's important, I've used gray. So this was just my go at doing an infographic, just to prove that I could actually practice what I preached, and maybe something went in. Now, for some of you, this might be quite a lot of work just for a piece of micro learning. But what I want to do is I want to challenge you with actually you can visually lead and visually tell things to people. And other than sometimes just giving text, is giving an annotated piece of text. As we found out, text and words, people remember them. Sorry, text and pictures, people remember. So could you find the right picture? So that's my assignment. That did take me 6 hours to do. I don't recommend, if you're doing micro learning, you spend 6 hours. However, if you get the right infographic and it helps people learn, and you're able to generate either more value for your learners that way, then brilliant, you can justify it. And it might well be in your organizations you've got graphic artists who could do it for you, but that was my attempt. You can see where I've played on the I think it's Up by the Disney Pixar film. That's what I was trying to pick out. So this was for the female magazine. I hope that makes sense. Yes, somebody just put down Canva and Venage are go-to tools, and it's really interesting. Canva have also they've just bought in with a graph making company, which you'll be able to get on it. So yeah. So the other tool I'd recommend is called. I'm just going to. Yeah, I've got a list of the tools actually I can show you in a moment if that's all right. I'll just carry on with where we're going because I think what I'll do is I'll show you those at the end if that's all right, Jiwan. Guy, you've got a question?
I do, if it's okay. With the circle in the middle, the red, orange, and green one.
Yeah.
Is it right that the biggest area is sort of on the left, or is it sometimes that should?
Well, traditionally, if you work within the kind of militant wing of, or the very strictly, your biggest portion of a pie chart should always start at 12 o'clock. So I've actually broken the rules there. So where you've got the red section, that should technically start round at 12 o'clock. So it's in the wrong place. So it always works. So it always goes clockwise from 12, biggest section, smaller section, smaller section. That's the traditional way of presenting it. However, because I was trying to graphically lay out 3 other areas and I wanted the flow of information, I decided to break the rules. It's one of those things. I think sometimes we get very used to seeing graphical forms, and sometimes if you do something different, people go, oh, they notice it because it looks slightly different. My tutor definitely, first of all, said, oh, that's wrong, but I see why you've done it. So yeah, the answer is there are certain ways of doing that. I would recommend the course at UAL. Actually, I'm not doing a sales for them, but it was 4 evenings and it was hugely informative. So what I thought I'd go on to now is kind of, rather than kind of get into the kind of graphical form, because like I think Jiwan's been really useful saying there are tools out there you can use to do that, and I've got a list of those later. But I go into kind of some kind of principles of communicating data which really contributes to infographics. So number 1 I want to talk about is know your goal. So think about when you're preparing for your learners, who are you actually talking to? Who's your audience? Just like now, the fact that I can't really see you all, it is like speaking into the void a little bit at the moment. But what's your, if you like, what's your tone of voice? And that can be graphical. So, you know, because if you think about who you're talking to, what is the message that you want to get across loud and clear? Think about the impact that you want to make. So, for example, if you're working with executives, using cartoons and humor may not be appropriate. However, it may be effective in that it gets people to think differently, if that's right. But know your goal. Who is it that you're actually talking to? So start with that. And one of the things that I was told is, if you can make it personal, you can make it feel like you can make your audience feel like it matters, and then you can make them own it. So think about, who is it that I'm actually producing this graphic for? It's not for me. If I'm producing it for a group of, you know, executives who work in the IT industry, okay, that's going to formulate how I'm going to present this. How might I do that? If I'm producing it for a group of kind of female entrepreneurs, that will dictate how things look. But you make it personal. I think the audience can then latch into it. It's why I'm not a marketing and advertising expert, but once you tune into those kind of things, you can start to make things deliver and make impact. And I think it just shows a real conscientiousness on your part to do some thinking about the value that you're adding with your graphics by thinking about them. I'm bringing value to these people. So if I know more about them or I'm more specific, fabulous. The next thing is you need to use the right data. So, you know, sometimes, like, I've got to be honest, you can get a lot of data. I mean, you can go online and you can find lots of data from lots of sources. You've probably collected within your businesses and your companies, but you need to know, do you have necessary data? Is it sufficient? Is it the relevant data? I would say always get data that supports your point enough to draw conclusions. And that does sound like a little manipulative, but one of the things is you need to sometimes sit with some data and have a look at it and see what it tells you. I have taken spreadsheets of data and dumped them into graphical formats just to see what I learn from it. And sometimes you can move between actual number to percentages. There's a lot of things you can do. But when you know that you've got the right data, you can also, there's something you need to do, which is for the sake of your learner, is make sure that you've got the right kind of data there. Eliminate what I would call extraneous data. Don't put stuff there that's not necessary. So if it's not going to help your learners, don't put the data on. If you're trying to help your learners learn, just put what they need. And that's partly about telling the story. If you think, what kind of data will you need to source to tell your story? And then you need to determine what you're trying to visualize and what kind of information you want to communicate. That's all about using the right data. Sometimes you can just go down, if you try to include everything, it becomes a very messy and complicated diagram, or a graph or a piece of information. The next thing is we need to select the right visualization. And that means sometimes you might want to be using, if it's data from, it's numbers, you might want to plot numbers, you might want to position, line length, you can do things with area and angle, but also don't neglect the fact that there can be qualitative information too. So it might well be that you want to explore stories using infographics and you want to display it in a visual way. So I would say that's what's really important for people is visualizations that will focus more on shape than numbers. So as long as you can show people, some people will get really worried that their graph isn't, or the kind of chart they're producing isn't, mathematically correct. What you have to do is show the right relationships between things and make sure you're communicating. So you need to select suitable visualizations. And you'll know that, there are lots of trends in visualizations. For a long time, there were pie charts and then donut charts. Now something that's coming up is something called Sankey flows, which just talks about relationships between of how data flows. It's amazing. The next thing is, and this is something that I'm very passionate about, is you need to design for aesthetics. And I would say that what you need to do is design for style and clarity. So personally speaking, and I think this is a really good thing, is you should use clean fonts. You should use grid lines. You should align things neatly. And one of the things is you need to ensure that when you're presenting something, your data isn't masked or distorted. And I think the more readable a piece of data or information is with an infographic, the longer lasting it will be. And so you have to help with that. So I would avoid using fonts which have serifs. So I would avoid using fonts like Times New Roman, avoid using fonts like Garamond or Georgia. Fonts that I would go to would be Helvetica, Futura, even Arial, because they're easier to read on the eye. And lots of people are bemoaning the fact that lots of businesses are changing their fonts from having serifs in them to ones which have no serifs. But actually, it's been proven that fonts that have serifs are harder to read than ones that don't. And you'll notice I haven't used a single font on my slides that has a serif. There you go. And if you did see one, then tell me and I'll change it because I don't like them. So you need to design for style and clarity. So that's I mean, and part of that is you need to think a little bit like a designer, which is why, coming back to Jiwan's point, things like Canva can be really helpful because it's got a really good way of laying things out. The next thing is you need to choose an effective medium and channel. So at the moment I'm talking with slides, so I can do that, and you can put graphs on slides and things like that. But if you're using, if your learners are using mobile phones, you need to think about the right size of graph within that medium. So you have to be mindful of what medium and channel you're using. Is it animated? Is it print? Is it social media? There you go. And the last thing is, I think one of the things that's really useful is check your results. So one of the things I did with my homework exercise, I was sending it to Guy just to have a look at. Can you tell me what you think? And sometimes just asking people to see what they can see is a really good thing. So those are the kind of principles of communicating data that I think help make a really good infographic. Now, I realize we've been looking at a page or me prattling on and there's been no examples. So what I want to do is I want to give you just a couple more slides that will help you on your journey with thinking about how you might use infographics in microlearning. Really lovely quote is and this is kind of getting to the bit why I do infographics, which is stories are irresistible to the human mind because they activate our imaginations, and so we have no choice but to follow the mental movies created in our heads. And I think one of the things is if we can start to kind of help our learners get into kind of understanding the story that we're telling with our graphics, then actually we can help people learn points and remember them much well. So I've just got some slides here on this slide, which is these are the storytelling tips that I think are really useful. So you need to immerse your audience in the story. That's why if you can use a certain graphical style, that's really good. Always try to tell a personal story. You need to connect it somehow. So Juan Velasco is amazing at doing this. If you can, create suspense. So it might well be that you've got a number of graphs on your page that build up to make a story. Bring characters to life. Show, don't tell. So that's why this is one of the most powerful things of infographics is that you show people stuff. You don't have to tell them; they'll make it. And this is what I think is build up to what I call a star moment. Does anybody know what STAR stands for? Please, in the chat, add what you think STAR stands for. If you're still with us. Have we lost lots of people, Guy?
No.
Does anybody know what STAR is? Situation, task, action, result. No, I'll steal that one, though. That's great. Adam's still here. Great. I'll tell you what it stands for. A star moment is in your graphic, you need to create something they'll always remember. So this comes from the root of Hollywood storytelling arcs. And one of the things is if there's a star moment, if there's something brilliant that happens, it's something they'll always remember. So even in your graphic, where is your star moment? Where is the thing they go, oh, yeah? Because if you can do that, it creates something they'll always remember. And microlearning is about improving people's ability to not forget, to learn and to retain. And if you can have one key element that people remember, it can often be, if you like, the doorway to unlocking further remembering, because people can only retain about 5 or 6 things, and I've overloaded you already today. But if you can think, actually, in my graphic, what's the something they'll always remember from the graphic, it's really good. And then you end with a positive takeaway. So for these are storytelling tips. So there's, if you're interested in the whole kind of world of storytelling, there's a really good website called it's called blogreadsy.com. And what's on this site is what they call storytelling arcs, and it is possible in a graphic to tell a story. And these are just 2 storytelling arcs that I use, which is, if you like, if you look at the 3-act structure. So part of it is you have the exposition. So if you like, inciting the incident. This is the start point. Then you have a midpoint, which is where you're getting more engaged, and then you have a climax, which is the thing that they remember. It's a 3-act structure. You'll notice most movies have that, and in fact, the Freytag pyramid is pretty much most Hollywood films right now. And if you can think, in my vision, so I'm introducing them to an idea. They're going to engage with it. There's going to be a bit of action. Then there's a climax point, or you're making a point. Return or fall. So you go back to the reason why you started. Catastrophe or success, a formula for tragedy. These are really useful in understanding how actually we sequence our information in infographics. I find them just really useful. So when I'm thinking, I've got an example of, I thought, rather than just, so this is something I drew when I was trying to do what they call a wireframe. So this is just a draft of an infographic that I wanted to do. And I was trying to break it down into the themes that are useful. So this is an infographic that I was designing. So you need a title, and it needs to be catchy. Sometimes the title can be catchy. You can have a catchy title. You need a little introduction as to what the subject is. That's number 2. So a little graphic. So I was doing something on reusable coffee pods. I wanted some information about that, and then my chart was talking about was looking at how coffee pods basically are not biodegradable. So there was a graph. So both 3 and 4 on this were doing that, and that was the scientific proof. And then there was the visual example, which was 5. I created this balance between it takes 30 seconds to make a coffee in your pod thing, but it also takes 200 years for your pod to decompose. And for me, I was presenting the challenge, so that was a visual example. And then 6 was the call to action. If you want to buy biodegradable pods, here you come. So it's all about how you make your story and make your point. So you can do that graphically. So if you want to make a point to your learners about something, what's the title? What's the thing you're talking about? Choose a chart that grabs them, some scientific proof, which you can use some data, a visual example, call to action, and away you go. That was my go at that. So that's about using a story. I just want to prove that when we talk about using infographics to tell a narrative, actually you can do that. But if you think about any good infographic that you've seen, it will normally. So for me, what does the STAR acronym stand for in this context? I would say that for me, the point that I was trying to make in this context with the coffee pod things was something you'll remember was 30 seconds to make a coffee, over 200 years for your pod to decompose. Maybe it's not the most memorable thing, but I just think next time you have a coffee and you put it in and it takes 30 seconds in your machine, you'll be thinking about 200 years if you remember that one thing. It's a little bit guilt trippy, Marion, I guess, but I've got to be honest, if we could all reduce the amount of stuff we try to put in landfill, the better, as far as I'm concerned, because the oceans are filling with plastic. And whilst I'm not an eco warrior, I genuinely believe we need to leave the world in a better state. There you go. I just put my eco credentials out there, haven't I? Very nervous. So these are the useful resources that I think you can have. So the data viz projects and the data viz catalog, they're absolutely awesome. They've got lots of examples. My most favorite one on here is Flourish Studio. If you want to get this, the Flourish Studio is completely free. There are a couple of things that if you want to do them, you've got to pay for. But most of the graphs are free on there, and they've got really good examples of how you can of how you can use them. So Flourish Studio. So that was Jiwan saying, if you want to go anywhere, check out Flourish Studio. You'll love it. But last thing is, so in summary, I kind of want to just kind of bring things together and say that I am convinced that if we can communicate well in a graphical or visual format with intention behind it, whether it's using data or information, I think students will remember things. And actually, whilst there's a lot of stuff to back that up, I think it will be what you're comfortable with. But I do know that lots of text is instantly forgettable for people. It's why lots of people use video clips to help people remember things. And I would say that infographics and well-chosen data visualizations sit alongside that in terms of quality and helping people. So I've got my last slide before Victor enters. And I thought I'd open it to the mic. So if you want to do that, is how could you boost microlearning with infographics? Because that's the challenge I'm at. You know, how could you boost microlearning with infographics? Over to you, Guy. I've gone on far too long.
No, thanks so much, Ben. That was really great. Whilst you're reflecting that on that question, which may take a longer time to think about, does anybody have any questions or observations that they'd like to ask Ben at this time? Well, while you're thinking of that, let me ask a question, if I may, which is, what's that sort of those initial steps somebody might take if they're thinking about, I've got this idea for microlearning, I want to do an infographic. How do they bridge that sort of that mental, I want to do something using an infographic, to actually just starting that process?
I think often using, if you can find someone else's infographic to make your point. So if someone else is, so to get you on the journey, you have to think purposefully in terms of design. So has someone produced something that I can use that does it? If it does it well, then, and it meets the principles, then fine. What you're doing is you're saving time and you're thinking, as long as you reference who designed it and you're not using it illegally, absolutely. It's like using a YouTube clip, isn't it? You know, the Nobi stuff that we've used, often they're using clips made by other people, aren't they? That explain it well.
And if it doesn't exist, what would be that first step?
I think part of it is trying to, so for example, particularly, I mean, if it's data based, you know, in terms of if you have to manipulate a lot of data, that can be very off-putting. But I think it's one of the things I find is actually sketching on a pad what I think something might look like, and you have to play with it sometimes. You have, making an infographic is not about arriving at the finalized thing. So I think always playing on a piece of paper before you fire up a computer or Canva or Adobe Illustrator and things like that. So and look at it and say, if I get the right thing here, what am I communicating through that? So and in terms of getting started, I think it's also, whilst there are some wonderful complex infographics, I think for me it's about simplicity as well. So you don't necessarily have to think very complex. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I think the other thing that I found really interesting is this idea that the infographic doesn't necessarily, whilst it tells a story, it doesn't necessarily tell the answer. So there's a space for the learner or the person consuming that infographic to kind of, well, here's all the bits and pieces. It's up to you to make up your mind about what you based on the information that I presented to you. Yeah,
they often talk about, so people who are real pro at producing infographics, they talk about 3 layers. There's the one which kind of, there's the first layer, which is you can see what it is and you get an idea of what the learning is about. And then there's the second layer is where you need to look in and read and start to look. So actually it becomes the visual format. There was one I've seen which is of a cave network in I think it's somewhere in Southeast Asia. And one of the things is the caves are so big. What the graphics got a picture of a jumbo jet flying in it. And when you look at it first, you say, "Oh yes, it's a cave network." And then you realize someone's put this scale aeroplane in there to help you realize how big it is. Your learning changes because it's a visual clue. So there's that secondary level, and the third level is where people then start to pursue things themselves, and they start to look for other relationships and information. So I think it's the intention of any good infographic will be allowing people to engage in it. Dorling Kindersley books are really good examples of infographics. Often they'll have a kind of like, they'll have like a famous landmark, and they'll take it apart and show you detail. That. And what it does is you look at it, go, "Oh, it's a landmark." You look a bit closer, you do the learning, it takes you into the detail.
Fantastic, thank you. Anyone have any questions for Ben?
Please, no. Someone's creating a meme like the one before, a comic draft, not the widely known meme context. Memes are extremely underrated. I mean, I think playing on memes in infographics can be really useful. But all I'd say is that you have to remember that memes are cultural. So certain memes across different cultures will have different cachet. Particularly, so for example, I'm white British. I'm also half Dutch, so I do get a little bit of Dutch culture. Yeah, I'd say just be cautious about memes, but that means if you're using the right meme for the people you're writing for and you know them, brilliant, use it. Someone's put down, "I think the easiest way infographics boost learning is helping introduce the concept. It's something they can access over and over again. Sort of repetition help with the microlearning." Yeah, I think if you get a good graphic, it's something you can go back to. And I think that's one of the principles of microlearning, is making sure there's opportunity for not repetition, but for review, so you can see what people have retained.